in the 06010. Fantasy Focus.
Welcome to Fantasy Focus. Today's live stream show is presented by Hotwire, and you can watch us today and every day at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Well, weekdays only on ESPN's Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube page, as well as the ESPN app. One tap. And if you're listening to the audio feed, today's podcast is presented by Geico. You can download Fantasy Focus wherever you get your podcasts. And with that, we say hello and happy Friday to you, Field and Daniel, hanging out today.
Hey, buddy. How you doing? I'm good, man.
Are you enjoying this vantage point from the couch, the other couch?
Yeah, I like it.
We have a chair.
I like being able to see. We put Kyle in my chair today. Yep. I'm taking over for Matthew. Obviously, Stefania's out doing a bunch of camp tours.
Yep.
Mike Clay is not available, unfortunately. Matthew's writing Love Hate because someone's got to write it.
Right. Do it? Do they?
Yeah. Apparently.
Yeah,
apparently, because that's why I'm here. So,
well, this may be permanent. We haven't decided yet. We're going to have a conversation after the
TBD.
show. We're going to talk through it.
Might be a Jeopardy situation, if I'm honest with you. I mean, the executive producer just fit right into that lead role. You know what I'm saying?
Point right there. It's a very good point, Daniel. Coming up on today's show, we're going to discuss just briefly some of the things from the 2 preseason games last night. We've got 14 more preseason games over the next 3 days, including 3 more tonight. One on national TV. The Bills play on national TV tonight, and it would be good if I could remember who the Bills are playing.
Yeah, it'd be great
right now.
Yeah, for the show, just together for us as a show unit to know that the Bills were in fact playing tonight on national television.
Maybe by the time
they are playing another NFL team, and I am so excited about to.
Yes.
And it's
not
at
the Patriots.
Detroit Lions.
The Detroit Lions. There it is. All right, totally forgot about that. My bad. So many teams are doing joint practices right now that when they're doing the joint practices, you're hearing all about it during the week that you're like, oh, I know the Panthers and Colts are playing on Sunday because they've been practicing all week together. And the Patriots, I guess they didn't. They're practicing with the Eagles next week, I saw. But I think the Eagles had some joint practices this week. The point is you're seeing teams compete throughout the week, which is reminding you they're playing each other. But more importantly on today's show, we're going to do double trouble. We continue in the AFC South. We've got the Colts and the Titans, the 2 teams that I think many consider the favorites in the division. But how about a little bit of news, Daniel? Not news, but recaps from last night.
Sure.
I'll start with you. So we had 2 games, Patriots-Washington football team, and then the Battle of Philadelphia, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Philadelphia Eagles. Is there anything that you saw last night that you thought to yourself might be relevant in the world of fantasy football going forward?
I think, and I'm so glad Matthew's not here, but I think the Washington football team is going to be pretty good.
Yeah, they did look pretty good last night. Pretty effective. Couple of drives for Fitzy.
Yep.
Who hit a couple nice completions. Looked like Terry McLaurin and him have already developed a natural chemistry. Logan Thomas made a nice catch down the field. Antonio Gibson got some passing game work. Washington offense, I would say, on the whole, was encouraging.
Yep.
Nothing that maybe changed the way I viewed them from a ranking standpoint or what have you?
No, but half the time for preseason, even if someone has an unbelievable game, I'm not like, wow, I've got to move this guy up 20 spots. It's just all relative to how I'm rating that player.
Totally. So. My biggest thought from Washington was that let's go ahead and put Chase Young on ice for the next 3 weeks until the season first week of practice begins.
Yeah.
Because he's perfectly fine. He looks great. He's totally ready for the regular season. And it took me one snap to realize that Chase Young is a different level of ridiculous. On the Patriots side, though, I think probably if you were to poll 100 fantasy experts, that the biggest takeaway from last night was just the performance from Mack Jones. This was not, we're not building a bust in Canton yet for Mack Jones, right? He had 89 passing yards on 13 of 17 passing. There's actually a 16-yard completion that was ruled incomplete. That Bill Belichick was like, I'm not going to challenge it. It was pretty obviously a catch, and Belichick after the game was kind of like, it's clear, right? So some of preseason games just getting through them, right? So maybe the numbers look slightly different, but the point is that Mack, honestly, Daniel, looked kind of what you'd expect out of him. Really accurate, seemed calm and cool. At the same time, though, this is Cam Newton's job for the moment. So that's probably where here's what I would say, the takeaway from last night is that there's a chance, if you knew which Patriots quarterback was starting, there's a chance one of them cracks the top. well, I think if we knew it was Cam Newton starting, and it was going to be his job for a while, you may feel more comfortable taking him like somewhere between quarterback 16 and 21 or something like that.
Yep.
Mack Jones probably a little bit lower because there's not the rushing upside there. But if you knew one of them was going to be the guy, you might have a chance to use a late-round pick on them. And I think what last night probably reminded us is there's going to be pressure applied by the quarterback himself, in this case Mack Jones, on the coaching staff to make him the guy from week 1.
That's what I think that was my biggest takeaway, knowing that there's not a lot you take away from week 1 of preseason, right? But the idea that what you saw from Mack Jones was not an abysmal performance where the coaching staff is like, oh, I guess we got a little bit more work than we... Like if you see Cam struggle or Cam gets hurt or something happens, right now, week 1 preseason, it's just about Mack Jones showed that, hey, this kid's got some stuff we can work with, and I feel pretty comfortable with that.
Yeah, and I think if Cam gets named a starting quarterback in week 1, which I suppose doesn't necessarily have to happen because Belichick's been saying this since April, he's their starting quarterback.
Yep.
It'd still be harder to rank him with great certainty only because he may be the starter in week 1, but he may not be the starter by like week 3 or 4.
Right.
If Mack's the starter, you would think the leash is longer and there's a chance that they would kind of ride the wave with him a little bit longer, maybe even the entire season. But the gap between those two is narrow. I think that much we understood going into last night and was probably only reaffirmed.
I want to be a Mack Jones fan. I just want to say this. Like through the pre-draft process, it was a little bit easy to take shots at him because he was a little, not.
Dude,
this,
it was like this. We talked about this a lot in the first draft pod. Is that like just because some people had a hard time envisioning Mack Jones being worthy of the 3rd overall pick, it's like you thought we were talking about a bum,
right?
The guy had 4,500 passing yards. He completed 78% of his passes. He had like 39 touchdowns, like 5 interceptions. He had one of the greatest careers over a 1.5 season span at Alabama, which is a school rich with history. Like, remember Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle talking about him during the pre-draft process? Like, you ask any Alabama guy about Mack Jones, they're like, that's his guy.
Yeah.
But because people didn't feel like he deserved being the 3rd overall pick, the narrative changed a bit. But anyways, that maybe the gap is slightly narrower.
Yep.
Only take 2 takeaways from Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. Really only one. Because I thought Dwayne Haskins looked better in the first half. There were a couple of errant misses in the first half that were reflective of his time during Washington.
I was going to say that is Dwayne Haskins.
Yeah. But Quez Watkins caught my eye, and he's been he's one of those sort of preseason darlings. He is so fast.
Yeah.
He had a ridiculously long touchdown, and there's no fantasy value here. Probably the most enjoyable highlight of the night, and maybe, just maybe, he is if you play in a deep dynasty league, and I've upped the number of dynasty leagues that I'm playing in. Like I recently concluded the draft. There was 28 rounds where you go to the end of it and you're literally drafting anybody.
Yes.
I'm telling you, it's like anybody's getting drafted. Like Steven Montez is getting drafted in that league, the Washington 3rd string quarterback. So I'm like, oh, Quez Watkins, that could be on the radar.
That's a guy.
You know what? Maybe one last thought, actually. And this probably it's probably a year away. But Ramondre Stevenson from the Patriots, their 4th round pick out of Oklahoma, had a 91-yard touchdown run. It was one of 2 runs he had last night. Maybe he's an important name to file away if you do play in a keeper or dynasty league because James White, Sony Michel, Brandon Bolden are all going to be free agents next offseason. Mm-hmm. It could be that Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson are competing for carries just a year from now. He's a pretty good player.
He's a pretty good player. He's a guy that in my I have 2 different big dynasty leagues that I've been a part of, and he's somebody that the Damian Harris manager specifically tried to target to be able to make sure that there was I'm not sure I agreed with that philosophy, but I do understand that I'm really excited about the youth in that team. Mack Jones, Damian Harris, what they have, there's some movement there.
Yeah, there could be. It's been a while since we talked about the Patriots and being young, right?
I know. Well, that's the thing. It's just a whole new Patriots team, and I'm interested to see the way that Bill Belichick, who we've watched with Tom Brady over so long, how is he going to change or how is he going to adapt and how is he going to help these young players be what they are? I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, it's something different, something new. And again, that's about as far as we'll go with these preseason games. Perhaps over the weekend we'll have some more notable things take place, especially with Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, Trevor Lawrence, of course. Every first-round quarterback will be in action between last night and Sunday. So lots to look forward to with those first-round quarterbacks. But I think that's enough from last night's action. Let's get right to Double Trouble.
Double trouble. Double trouble. Double trouble. Double trouble.
As of this moment, they're on double secret probation.
All right, so the two presumptive favorites in the AFC South this year are the Colts and the Titans. Two fun teams to talk about today. We'll begin with Indianapolis, who, as we know, early on in training camp, it's been one of those examples of, like, why can't we have nice things in Indy? There's been some really good things that have happened, including recently extending their head coach and their general manager, Chris Ballard, and also Frank Reich, their coach, two very, very accomplished men. They've seen some players step up, but they also have had some notable injuries, which includes their quarterback Carson Wentz and their all-pro guard Quenton Nelson, who both, in back-to-back days, had the exact same foot surgery.
Crazy.
So as of right now, just some reporting from Mort in recent days, the Colts feel as though those players are trending towards being ready for Week 1, which leads us right into Carson Wentz. A few years ago, Daniel, he took the league by storm, and he was a legit MVP candidate. A couple years later, after dealing with some injuries of his own, he played incredibly well to finish the 2019 regular season. That was a year in which he became the first quarterback in NFL history to throw for 4,000 yards without a single wide receiver to have over 500 receiving yards, right? So, like, we're talking about bargain bin pass catchers leading him or allowing him, helping him get to over 4,000 passing yards. We're a year away from him being a pretty effective player. He's probably imperfect, pretty effective. But factoring in both the foot issue and just your overall confidence in a guy who was broken last year, do you have any belief that Carson Wentz can resurrect his career in Indianapolis?
I do,
Okay.
but that doesn't necessarily have to mean that there's fantasy value there this year, if that's fair to say.
Yep.
I love Frank Reich, and I love what he was able to do with Frank Reich. Like you just said, we've seen Carson Wentz be really good. We watched him, QB3 in points per game when he was with Philly under Frank Reich in 2017. Second among quarterbacks in air yards per pass attempt. I love his aggressiveness and the way that he uses his feet. The problem is, as we've seen, it's not just the injuries, but his on-the-field production. There's been something there.
Yeah, his confidence is shot.
And it's been tough because I know the player that Carson Wentz can be. Right now, I don't have Carson Wentz as somebody that I'm drafting. He is not a redraft quarterback for me. But if you talk about a guy that I'm going to watch on the waiver wire, he's the kind of person with Frank Reich that we've seen have success that I'm going to watch that team and see how they progress over the first couple weeks. And if things start looking well, I don't mind going out there and grabbing him off the waiver wire, but just not somebody I can do in a redraft league.
Yep, not ranked for me as well inside my top 25 quarterbacks. Part of that is because the injury could limit him some at the beginning of the year. It sounds like he has a chance to play in Week 1, but if he doesn't return until Week 4, well, then all of a sudden your schedule is reduced by 20-ish%.
Yeah.
So there's the injury factor. There's the idea that coming off of a foot injury, I think you're a lot less likely to use your quarterback as a designed runner, which Wentz is a capable athlete. He's not Lamar Jackson or anybody like that, but he's certainly not a statue in the pocket either.
5 touchdowns in his first 7 games in 21. Rushing touchdowns, excuse me. So, he absolutely used his legs.
Remember, he got hurt, if I'm not mistaken, on a play when he tore his ACL the first time. If I'm not mistaken, it was a play where he actually rushed for a touchdown. It was against the Rams in December.
Yes, I think
and
you're
it was
right.
one of those plays where, it looked just like an awesome highlight play.
Yeah.
And then later on, you're like, oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Torn ACL for Carson Wentz. But I think between the possibility he doesn't run nearly as much, and then just objectively speaking, he was the worst starting quarterback in the NFL last year. And this is a bet trade by the Colts. This is them sort of casting their die that, hey, I understand what happened last year. We believe that the infrastructure, the personnel we have around him, a change of scenery, the mental space that Carson Wentz will presumably be in here compared to where he was in Philly, where we know it was really ugly, is going to be enough to pay off. But from a fantasy perspective, I think right now, no need to move a draft pick on Carson Wentz. If he ends up being a waiver wire find, that's great news for Indianapolis. And good news for Philly as well, because they potentially have a first-round pick coming their way if Carson Wentz plays enough of the snaps.
Do you think, really quickly, there is an unranked quarterback or a quarterback outside the top 20 that has more upside than Carson Wentz, just based on what we've seen in his career?
I think so.
You do?
I do. I mean, I think there are enough. There are probably actually a handful of them. I'd have to look exactly where my guys are that are right out to the top 20. But maybe even, to be honest with you, you're probably only talking about the top 50, a top 15 and beyond, because in a 10 team league, it's only one quarterback. But you've got guys like Sam Darnold, as crazy as that sounds.
I'm excited about Sam
fun,
Darnold.
Right? Good weapons around him. Zach Wilson, I understand the weapons are not as imposing, but you're a rookie who's athletic. Do some damage with your legs. He's an example of somebody I think has comparable upside to Carson Wentz. There are a bunch of guys that I think actually could be pretty decent. That I think that Carson Wentz is like not a target for me in any way, shape, or form.
Of course.
But let's get to the running backs, though, because these are interesting. And we talked about Jonathan Taylor a while ago when we were talking about the Quenton Nelson and Carson Wentz news initially. I kind of issued a mea culpa, my bad, like wish I had not been as assertive when those injury news updates came along. But now that we have a chance to kind of level set with the Colts, I thought about this, and I'm going back to, like, I need to trust my gut here, right? And my gut is that this guy's a superstar. He's ready to break out. And he was a certified baller the last half, basically the last 6 games of last year. He had 238 rushing yards, I believe it was, in the Week 17 win over the Jacksonville Jaguars. So that probably inflates the stats a little bit. But he finished 4th in rushing last year, Daniel. And we talk about opportunity and also talent. The talent's unquestioned. I think he's a potential star running back. I think a year from now we could be talking about him in that top tier of running backs that you're considering with the first overall pick. I really believe in him that much.
Agreed.
The opportunity, I think, is there as well, and I'm more confident in this. But let me ask you, and then I'll chime with my own thoughts. Are you at all concerned about either the injuries or the possibility that Marlon Mack specifically, or potentially Nyheim Hines, limits Jonathan Taylor's role a little bit?
I am concerned that it will limit his role a little bit.
Okay.
Yes. I think the big thing for me, so I looked at my rankings last night when we were getting ready for the show. I actually moved him to RB7. I have Austin Eckler at RB8 and Aaron Jones at RB9. So I moved him ahead of those two guys. I'm with you. I love Jonathan Taylor this year. Final 6 games, 24.3 points per game. 22.2 touches per game there. 6th most red zone carries. The dude had 12 rushing touchdowns. What I'm looking for when you're talking about that elite running back is a guy that not only gets in the end zone, but also has the ability to be able to have those yards and, give me 35 plus catches, and I'm thrilled. Jonathan Taylor is exactly that kind of running back for me. However, it's not a great offense, I don't think. With Carson Wentz, we're not sure what's going to happen there. Pass catchers, I like Michael Pittman, but there's a little bit to be desired. So the offense scares me a little bit more than his health, if that's fair to say.
Okay, yeah, I'm not as concerned about that part, and I'm actually not concerned on the workload thing either, because that's been one of the demerits of Jonathan Taylor. If, again, we're nitpicking when you're talking about a guy that you have at RB7, I have at RB8.
Of course.
But Marlon Mack's coming off of an Achilles tear, which, as we know, all by itself, like, that's a difficult thing for anybody to come over, despite what Kevin Durant, who's just an absolute stone cold killer, has done. He's just a different level at a different sport as well. But I still can't get over KD's magnificent season this year. But Marlon Mack coming off of an Achilles tear. And I know that he's a beloved player, right? He's one of the first players Chris Ballard drafted. He's a guy that he re-signed this year. He's a great dude. To borrow Mike Clay phrase, cream rises, baby.
Yes,
I think the cream rises with Jonathan Taylor to the point that, like, Marlon Mack's role may be at the beginning of the season more pronounced than it is by, like, week 4 or 5. I just think Jonathan Taylor's taking this backfield and storming away with it. I'm sort of workshopping a new name for my list. Fields favorites might be it.
Ooh, that's not bad.
And after, like, reflection and contemplation and going back and looking at a couple things and speaking to a couple people, Jonathan Taylor's on my list. He's on my Fields favorite list.
I like it.
I'm in on Jonathan Taylor. I think a potential major year is ahead. But Nyheim Hines is an interesting one, Daniel, because he's in this backfield and he's not scared of Jonathan. He's just not. If you're scared about Nyheim Hines relative to Jonathan Taylor, you're barking up the wrong tree. I pulled this up last year. Nyheim Hines last year here's his rushing totals from last year in 8 separate games. 0 yards, 8, 0, 8, 18, 2, 10, and 17. What you're not concerned about Nyheim Hines with is the rushing value.
Yep.
But the passing game value might be it. And I think that's fair enough that, like, maybe it puts a little bit of a ceiling on Jonathan Taylor's upside versus a Saquon Barkley or a Christian McCaffrey or those types.
Yep.
That's fine. I'm okay with that part. But is there standalone value, in your opinion, with Nyheim Hines? Because he was RB15 last year for the season.
That's tough for me. I don't right now. I have him as running back 39, and part of that is because not knowing what's going to happen with Carson Wentz, not knowing how that offense is going to be. The idea that he's just a great pass catcher. The team wants to use him, right? You don't give somebody 63 receptions unless you want to be able to get the ball in their hands, and he's a good player.
Yeah.
But he's not Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. When you've got someone like Jonathan Taylor, if Nyheim Hines wasn't there, Jonathan Taylor would be catching 50-plus balls, and he would be in that top tier that you mentioned. I really believe that.
Yeah, but I just don't think I do not believe there is standalone value there.
Nope.
I've got him as an RB5. I could see him in the 16-team league, PPR scoring, because he'll have some boom or bust games. But last year, for a guy that is a pass catcher, right, that's what you're drafting him for if you're going to draft him. He had 8 games with 3 or fewer catches. So... and I know he had 2 touchdowns in the opening game of last year, and he was one of the first players we discussed after week 1 of 2020. But I do think those games are going to be very irregular for Nyheim Hines. So,
Agreed.
Good player. And by the way, he'll get paid soon by the Colts. Like, dynamic punt returner, very good pass catcher, another homegrown player, good third down player as well for them, but better real football player than he is a fantasy football player.
Agreed.
All right, wide receivers will be interesting, as well as a couple of tight ends. We'll talk about them in just a minute. But first, do you own or rent your home?
Yep.
Sure you do, and I bet it can be hard work. But you know it's easy? Bundling policies with Geico. Geico makes it easy to bundle your homeowners or renters insurance along with your auto policy. It's a good thing, too, because you already have so much to do around your home. Go to geico.com, get a quote, and see how much you could save. It's Geico easy. Visit geico.com today. That's geico.com.
Field, imagine a nice vacation. Is there a
No
view
Matthew
of
in the podcast.
Oh, that's a perfect vacation. Oh,
so
gosh.
good.
That's today.
Oh, it's today. That's right.
Is there a view of a parking lot in that vacation for you, though?
No.
No. You know what?
definitely not.
So don't book a cheap hotel, Field. Book an expensive hotel for cheap on Hotwire. With hot rate deals, you can stay in a nicer hotel than you ever thought possible. Just select your city, your neighborhood, and the amenities you're looking for. Then get your hot rate. Better views, king-size beds, and a freshly pressed waffle robe awaits you. Also, actual waffles likely await you as well. Download the Hotwire app now and book beyond your wildest means. All bookings final.
So we're going to talk about the Colts pass catchers right now. But I used that 30 seconds when you were reading that Hotwire read to check Twitter quickly.
Yeah? What happened?
Mama Dopp's watching, and she's really proud right now.
Oh, my gosh.
Hey, Mama Dopp.
Hey, Mom. I love you.
Yeah, she's really proud of you, right?
She's dope.
Yeah, she is the best.
She interacts with all of our listeners
I know.
so much, and I feel like I've loved how much seriously, I want to say this to our community. Our community has embraced my mother in a way that I'm just so unbelievably thank you for. Thank you guys for being such everyone, all of the men and women that listen to this podcast, you guys are just great, and it just means a lot.
It's so fun. I love it, and it's like our own little, I don't know, comment section.
Yeah,
right?
it is.
That's when you and I were growing up, like comment sections, like message boards were big. So we're like a Reddit thread, just on a podcast instead.
Yeah.
So let's have a conversation about the Colts wide receivers. I think there are 3 names that people know in this group, Daniel. We'll start with T.Y. Hilton, the elder statesman, who for the first half of last year, a little bit longer than that actually, was a ghost.
Yeah.
He is the ghost. That's his nickname. Problem is he was a ghost last year. He had 0 touchdowns in the first 11 weeks of the season. But he finished strong last year. Weeks 12 through 17, T.Y. Hilton averaged over 17 fantasy points per game, over 70 receiving yards per game. And he was tied for 3rd in the NFL with 5 receiving touchdowns during that time. Are you buying the last 5 weeks or 6 weeks of last season was a resurgence from T.Y. Hilton that will carry over into the year? Or do you think that there's going to be a changing of the guard at the Colts wide receiver 1 position this season?
I think there's going to be a changing of the guard at the Colts wide receiver 1 position.
I feel that way as well. So I think we both agree. They're so not ranked, I'm assuming.
I do not have T.Y. Hilton ranked.
Yeah, nor do I.
The upside I'm not sure what the upside is on an older player like that. Of course, we've seen T.Y. Hilton be unbelievably great, and he's going to have some games. He'll probably have a couple games where he's fantastic. We saw it at the end of last year, but with where he's getting drafted or where he would be getting drafted, give me guys that have more upside or a higher ceiling.
He's a good example, and I write the column every year, do the video every year, and it'll come out soon, so I look forward to that, about the rules of fantasy football, right? The 9, usually it's 9, sometimes 8 rules of like drafting fantasy football, and it's for those that haven't played before. Because I get it. Some people have been listening to this show since the day it started and know more about fantasy football than
You and I?
maybe even you and I.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be honest. But others are getting indoctrinated and they're learning on the fly.
Yep.
And one of the rules is always like draft for upside late, right? And so if you're going to take a 15th round wide receiver, like I'd be more inclined to swing for the fences with a Darnell Mooney as an example over somebody like T.Y. Hilton. Maybe it's a Laviska Shenault, who I think he's going earlier, but a player that there's 75 of these young wide receivers that you could find.
Pick a flyer that
Pick
you
a
like,
flyer
and you're
out of the late
good.
round bucket of flyers.
Yeah.
So there are so many others that I think would be worth considering over a player like T.Y. Hilton, who we know he's been there and done that. He is a guy who's helped a lot of people to finish the championships over the years. But I should be on other, and by the way, inferior quarterback play this year. Philip Rivers was good last year, so you take a step down in quarterback play.
Yep.
I should be on other Colts wide receivers. And there are two to mention here, Daniel. I think I know which one we're going to gravitate towards, though. Paris Campbell, who missed a lot of time last year. He's unfortunately early in his career been banged up too much, but he's a nifty. He was a nifty slot player for Ohio State back during his college days. And as a matter of fact, 37 of his 39 routes last year came from the slot. So he has a role here in this offense. But is he the young Colts wide receiver that you believe merits late round bucket of flyer consideration?
He is not. That is Michael Pittman Jr. Field
Amen, yeah.
Yates. I am all in on Michael Pittman Jr. Give me a guy like him, like you said when we're talking about if there is a single Colts pass catcher I am targeting during draft day, it is him and only him.
Yeah, I agree there. And a couple thoughts. First of all, he was a player that we really wanted to make happen at the end of last year. I kept saying, like, the breakout's coming. He never fully broke out, but it was obvious that his role increased a bunch, his confidence increased a bunch, and the Colts' confidence in him continued to increase week over week.
Yeah.
He's a super talented guy. And by the way, like, they've talked him up relentlessly this offseason. I mean, Chris Ballard, their GM, has been open about it. One thing I appreciate about Chris Ballard, amongst the many things, that he's pretty candid. Like, he thinks this guy has a chance to be a really darn good player. The Colts, at one point this offseason, Ballard was talking about this. Basically, the Colts like their receivers more than the public likes their receivers. And part of that was because of their well-placed optimism that Michael Pittman's going to take another step forward, and a guy like Zach Pascal, who's like perpetually underrated. We're not mentioning here, not ranked, but still, a solid functional wide receiver. Those kind of guys are going to step up. But if you're targeting one, I think we agree it's Michael Pittman, a guy who went at the top of the second round last year during this ridiculously deep draft
Really
of wide
deep
receivers.
class.
So
Yeah.
like T. Higgins, it wasn't their fault per se that they fell to 33 and 34. Really like Michael Pittman. I think he's a late round flyer for me for sure, and a good dynasty ad.
I agree, especially in Dynasty. I love him in Dynasty. And like you said, coming up to last year, at the end of the year, we saw a little bit more of what we were hoping for. But the reason why this is a guy, I'd love to rank this guy higher. But I didn't see the production consistently last year. And so it's, all right, I think this is the year where it's going to come. But
we might have to rename this, like the Michael Pittman conundrum, because before the show, Daniel and I were talking about this, is that Michael Pittman is just on the border of being ranked. I've got him at 46. You've got him at 50. I don't want to rank more wide receivers because I'm of the fundamental belief that, like, we should be doing things in tiers anyways, right? Because the difference between the guy I have at wide receiver 46 and wide receiver 47 is non-existent in some cases, right? Like, why is it that Michael Pittman is at 46? And again, to use Darnell Mooney as an example, what would make him 47 versus 46? Like, you have to understand we are splitting the thinnest of hairs here. But Michael Pittman, you could talk me into him being wide receiver 40, whereas others don't have him ranked at all, might have him at like wide receiver 65, because there are a lot of really capable young players around the NFL at wide receiver. What do you got, Kyle? You look at me like you have a...
Yeah, you mentioned the sub 500 receiving yard season for receivers under Wentz. That season, Alshon Jeffrey led the receivers with 12.2 points per game.
Wow.
Could Pittman get there? That'd be wide receiver 38 last season.
Yeah, I think so.
12.2?
12.2? I think it's possible.
How
yeah.
much you looking at?
I
That's
definitely, with increased production and consistency from last year, a lot of it's going to, though, depend on quarterback play. I mean, it's just going to be dependent upon quarterback play for me.
Yeah, I think so for sure. By the way, so 12.2, that would be like 60 catches, a little over 1,000 yards, and 0 touchdowns. So bake in a few touchdowns, like 60 catches, 1,000 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Like, I think that's doable.
I think
Michael
that's doable
Pittman.
for
yeah,
Pittman.
I mean, but also like, and I know we can say a million different things.
I
but,
know. I
like,
love you.
he could be a breakout candidate this year.
Yeah.
He could be a star. Like, Michael Pittman could have 75 catches for 1,150 yards and 8 touchdowns that wouldn't surprise. He's really, really talented. He was one of my favorite underrated prospects coming into the draft before he became a Colt. Like, coming into the 2020 NFL draft, he's a really talented guy. It's just it's a Michael Pittman conundrum. There are
Yes.
about 92 wide receivers that I want to rank. All right, so for the tight ends, Daniel, Mo Alley Cox,
Well,
Jack Doyle, both there.
Here's the difference between Matthew and I. Do I have either of these tight ends ranked?
You do not.
Do you?
I do not.
Okay.
They also, by the way, drafted Kylan Hill. No, I'm sorry. What's the 4th round pick's name? Out of SMU, tight end. You got
Fourth
this guy.
round pick out of
4th round
SMU,
pick.
tight end.
This is great. This is great podcasting right
Yeah.
here. But-
also,
but-
this is not like you. Usually, you're the one
I
that's
know,
like on the
and
top.
my brain just melted. I'm starting to, I'm
Is it
unraveling.
because you're not used to sitting next to someone so pretty?
That's right. You know what? My eyes have been distracted. Kylan
Yeah.
Granson. Thank you, Kenny. Yes, I had Kylan. Kylan Hill is the 6th or 7th round pick for the Packers out of Mississippi State, who I was thinking of. But Kylan Granson, SMU tight end, is a player that, again, the Colts do an amazing job. They have this great content team that puts out post-draft and pre-draft and in-draft content. And Kylan Granson's like a guy that Frank Reich loves. I think they might call them like horseshoe players or something. They have a star that they put on players. They have an identifier that says like this is a guy that kind of checks all the boxes of what the Colts want in a draft pick.
Oh, that's cool.
And I think I could be right. Could also be wrong here. I think Kylan Granson may have been one of the guys that fit that bill. But either way, I know that Frank Reich saw a lot of him during the pre-draft process. So 3 tight ends means you have zero
You have
fantasy
no
tight ends right now.
Moving on from the Colts, though, I do want to say that Blue is my mascot 1 in my fantasy rankings, and I just want to say shout out to our buddy Blue because we love him.
By the way, he's number 1, and I don't know number 2 is.
It's not even close.
Yeah, Blue.
It's that huge tier between. Yeah,
We love you, Blue.
He's great.
And follow Blue not just on Twitter and Instagram.
TikTok.
He was the first person in the NFL community, if I'm not mistaken, to reach 1 million TikTok followers. Like, you think about all the guys who are on TikTok. I mean, I think on TikTok. Like, all the influencers on TikTok. Like, Matthew Bear. Oh, wait.
Wait a second.
I meant like actual TikTok stars. But yes, he was the first NFL mascot for sure. And I think the first like NFL public person who made it to 1 million followers on TikTok. Pretty
dope
good stuff for you. All right. As you know, we like blind resumes on this show. We've got a blind resume for you. And Blind Resume is brought to you by Hotwire. Book an expensive hotel for cheap on Hotwire. Download the Hotwire app to book beyond your wildest means. All bookings are final. We're going to play a little game of Blind Resume as we turn towards the Tennessee Titans. And, of course, Julio Jones will be brought up. So during 2020, Julio Jones averaged 15.1 yards per catch, identical to the other wide receiver here. He also averaged 2.1 points per target, identical to the other wide receiver here. Like Julio Jones, who was the 6th overall pick, this guy was a former top 10 overall pick. Daniel, do you have an idea of who this other wide receiver might be?
This is tough.
Yeah.
Part of me, I wanted to say 15.1 yards per catch.
Pretty good right there.
So here's the thing. Former top 10. This doesn't talk about fantasy value. Like Henry Ruggs could maybe be an option for me just as like a long yards per catch and then the 2.1 yard, points per catch.
Not a bad thought. I don't know the answer. And I'm like, after Kyle dominated us so frequently in trivia last year, I'm just sort of waving the white flag.
Forget about it.
So who do we have on this blind
The
reveal?
bottom one. You got a former top 10.
Draft pick. Former top 10. Henry Ruggs. Former top 10.
Corey
Davis.
There's another guy you like
we
more.
should've known. This ties it all together. 2 guys,
Obviously.
1 former Titan, 1 new Tennessee Titan. Wow, interesting. Good news for Jets fans right there. Of course, Corey Davis, now a New York Jet. So let's get to the Tennessee Titans, Daniel, a team that potentially is one of the most loaded in all of fantasy this year. And I don't know how long it's going to be until we start appreciating Ryan Tannehill appropriately, but
Last year. I've been on the Tana wagon for a while.
Ryan Tannehill is, once again, awesome. He was great last year. Last year, how about this? 33 touchdowns and 7 picks last year.
Oh, my gosh.
Plus, he had 266 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns last season. That's ridiculous. He was quarterback 7 overall. He was 21.5 points per game last year for Ryan Tannehill. So a juggernaut season from Ryan Tannehill. And while they did lose a couple of key pass catchers this offseason, They lost Johnny Smith to New England. They lost Corey Davis to the New York Jets. Adam Humphries, who was never really a factor for them, but they did at one point pay good money, got cut. He's now with the Washington football team. All those guys are gone. But you also brought aboard Julio Jones, who is an absolute destroyer, and you also brought aboard Josh Reynolds, who they like a lot and could sort of fill in that third wide receiver role that Adam Humphries was filling for them previously. Is he, I don't know, underappreciated? I'm not sure what to ask about Ryan Tannehill.
Let me ask you a question. We got an offensive coordinator switch here in this team, right?
Yes.
And that's one of the things that I love. So Arthur Smith was really great with Ryan Tannehill, and I love using Derrick Henry as the running back that he is for them to be able to get Ryan Tannehill so many bootleg touchdowns in the red zone. And I wonder if that's a thing, and I hope that they still do this year. I just always wonder when you switch offensive coordinators and you look back at last year's stats, how are they going to correlate to this year? How are things going to change? And but, man, Ryan Tannehill is good. Let's just stop.
There's not much to say here,
He's
right?
quarterback 10 for me. That's it.
Maybe he's underappreciated in, like, quote-unquote real football narrative talk. But for fantasy, I think he's appropriately appreciated. He's ranked across the board as quarterback 10. He's going as quarterback 10. His 10th round ADP is in the same draft tier as Matthew Stafford. I prefer him to Stafford, both in terms of overall rank and also ADP value right there. Like, that's going to be one of my favorite targets amongst quarterbacks this year. He might be on the field's favorite list when you think about it more and more. The only thing I will say for Ryan Tannehill, and just like it's hard to sustain the rushing touchdowns year over year.
Yeah.
He's a really good athlete, though, that much we know, but 7 rushing touchdowns is hard to come by any year for any quarterback. Heck, some running backs have a hard time getting there. He was really efficient last year, but he's been really efficient since he took over as a starter. That's why they paid him 4 years and $29 million per year. Tannehill's a good player, man. Excited to see him this season. Derrick Henry now. Let's get to him. Our king, King Henry, Derrick Henry, RB3 last year, RB3 in points per game, 20.8 points per game. Everybody at ESPN has Derrick Henry ranked somewhere between RB2 and RB5. I have him as RB3. Daniel, you have him RB4.
Is that a Kamara swap?
Yes, I have Alvin Kamara right behind Derrick Henry.
Okay.
And again, we don't have to really overthink this too much.
What are you going to say?
So here's what you know about Derrick Henry is that over the past 2 seasons, he has played in 33 games.
Okay.
I'm sorry, 31 games.
I was going to say there's only 16 games in a season.
31 games. I think they may have sat him one game at the end of 2019 when they already had their seed locked in. He has 33 rushing touchdowns. He scores over a rushing touchdown per game.
That's unreal.
Do you know the last time that Derrick Henry did not have 15 carries in a game?
High school. I don't know what.
Right.
Why would they not give him 15 carries in high school?
When DeMarco Murray was on the team, that's when.
It's probably been about that long. December 2nd, 2018 was the last time he didn't have 15 carries in a game. And as we know, more frequently, it's like 25 or even 30 in some cases. He is the workhorse of all workhorses. There's really one limiting factor with Derrick Henry, is that over the past 2 seasons, he has just 37 total catches. So Christian McCaffrey might get that in 4 games.
Right.
Derrick Henry has that in 31 games.
Yeah.
But it's offset by the fact that he's the biggest workhorse in the NFL. He's the best touchdown maker in the NFL. If you want to put him as RB2, I'm totally fine with it. There's nothing to say here on Derrick Henry other than I appreciate you. I love watching you play. You're my favorite running back to watch, and I can't wait to watch you absolutely steamroll people and stiff-arm defenders into oblivion again. Derrick Henry is a joy and an honor to watch.
Can I just say that for Mike to project 1,700 rushing yards and 14 touchdowns, like that's not. Mike is conservative a lot of times with his projections. Like that is unreal.
That's ridiculous. And by the way, that 20-plus touches in 14 of 16 games.
Get
again, so if 15 is like the low end for him, there's no arguing here.
The only concern, right, if the only thing you're talking about is just workload. He gets the ball so much, injury concern, the idea that he played so now, I don't want to say so few snaps, but he didn't play as much when DeMarco Murray was on this team, and the beginning of his career was a little bit of a lesser role here.
And by the way, like people keep saying, they keep using sort of averages to apply to Derrick Henry. Like, he's 28, and like this is when running backs tend to show signs of fatigue or regression. I'm like, he's also 6'3", 250 pounds, runs a 4.4 40, might be partial alien. Like, I'm not using other running backs to compare to Derrick Henry. I get why the exercise is useful, but
Right.
I'm sorry. Like, I just don't view Derrick Henry as anything like most running backs. So I hear you. At some point, Derrick Henry
Oh,
is
don't
not
say
going
I
to
hear
be,
you. I'm saying
I
that is the
hear whoever-
conversation.
No,
Yeah.
but I get it, right? I mean, Mike has him at running back 5, and you have to nitpick here. Mike
Right.
said, hey, you know, there's at least, whether it's a 5% chance or 25% chance, he could start to show a little bit of signs of rust, but I just don't forecast that coming this year.
Me either.
Too much good going and a very good offensive line. And again, they don't have a lot behind him at running back. They did not, like, even a couple of years ago, they signed Dion Lewis, who, by the way, congratulations to you on retirement. Adam Schefter reported that just before the show began.
Well, that's
But
exciting.
a couple, great story.
Yeah, I
Right?
love
Great
Dion.
story. 10-year career for a guy who many thought, might last 3 or 4 after being drafted. I think in the 5th round out of Pitt.
Good for him.
And dealing with some major injuries early in his career. But 4-year contract for Dion Lewis a couple of seasons ago, and you're like, oh man, that could eat into Henry's value. No.
That did not.
So Darrington Evans is the backup, and that's it, really, like in terms of running backs that I think have a chance to be a factor in this backfield. So we could espouse the virtues of Derrick Henry for probably the rest of the show.
Yeah.
He's that kind of player. He's been as useful as any running back over the past 2 seasons when you factor in Christian McCaffrey dealing with injuries last year. He's been the MVP of fantasy really over the past 2 seasons, probably along with Travis Kelce and Devontae Adams. All right, we're going to finish things off with the Titans pass catchers in just a moment, Daniel. But I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
You want to get in shape? Are you having trouble getting motivated?
Oh, yes, actually.
I know, right? Make 5-hour energy shots part of your lifestyle and get the energy boost you need to get fit.
Ooh.
We all know you sometimes do not want to go to the gym. Just take a 5-hour energy shot to give you the feeling and alertness so you can get to the gym. With 0 sugar and a convenient portable size, it's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5-Hour Energy website has flavors galore like watermelon, tropical burst, cherry, peach mango, and more. There's a flavor for everyone. Try them all. On the site, you even have the option to build your own 12-pack or 24-pack. You choose the flavors, and it is delivered right to your door. So if you go to 5hourenergy.com, and that's the number 5hourenergy.com, you can get some 5-Hour Energy product today using our promo code FFF to receive 10% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. So go to 5hourenergy.com today.
Forge your NFL dynasty in Madden NFL 22 with new franchise features that deliver even more control. Manage your coaching staff and upgrade them with new talents. Devise a new game plan for every opponent with in-depth weekly strategy and experience the ups and downs of a real NFL season with the enhanced season engine. Madden NFL 22 Game Day happens here. Pre-order now and field. We got 2 days and 12 hours until the new Madden comes out. I am pumped.
Super pumped for that. They've been great friends of the show in many ways, and they do an amazing job. Madden's a franchise that existed for, that's like 94 to 2021. That's 27, 28 years.
That's
They
as
do
old
an
as
amazing
Kyle.
job. Yeah.
Hey,
That's amazing.
a little older.
Right?
Yeah, to be fair. To be fair.
Yeah. So we love Madden. Can't wait for the game to come out, as Daniel mentioned. Very close to that taking place. We're going to talk about what could be the most dominant wide receiver duo in the NFL this year. It's at least in the conversation. There's some others that are really
I didn't think
good
we were
as
doing
well.
the Lions on Double Trouble today.
Oh, yeah. That's what I said could be the Titans.
Okay, could be.
the
That makes
Titans.
sense. Okay.
And before we get into A.J. Brown, we have a couple of notes to pass along from Kyle. What do you got?
Stefania's watching this show. So
Hello, Stefania.
Hey,
We miss
Stefania.
you.
What's up?
She wants it noted that Mo Alley Cox is a big boy. All capital letters. She saw him yesterday, wasn't practicing.
Former basketball player.
Former Hooper. Wants you to know not to worry about his health. He's a big boy, and she's coming armed with Colt stories on Monday. So be ready for that.
Okay.
Did she
Great.
spell boy B-O-Y or B-O-I-E?
You see, it was with a Y, but it was
think
all caps
B.O.I..
across the board.
I like B-O-I. Yeah,
B.O.I., like big boy,
all
like
cap
the rapper,
locks.
right?
Okay,
Big boy.
Yeah,
why
I like
not?
it.
Yeah.
And then we're getting into A.J. Brown. So I'm curious what you guys think. He averaged 21 points a game when he had a 30% target share or better, under 16 when it was under 30%. Obviously, Julio's in town. What do you think of A.J. Brown's value coming into 2021?
Yeah, I've got him inside my top 10 wide receivers this year. I have
too.
wide receiver 7, same as Daniel, because Daniel is brilliant.
Yep.
Just ahead of the likes of Justin Jefferson, which is interesting. Right after Corey Davis and Jonnu Smith signed elsewhere, there was chatter about A.J. Brown being like a top 5 wide receiver in terms of rankings, which is not blasphemous by any stretch. he's an unbelievable talent, right? I mean, he's good for a highlight reel catch almost every single Sunday, Daniel. There are just a couple of questions that you hope for with A.J. Brown. One is the increased volume that Kyle was just sort of forecasting.
Yeah.
7 games last year with 4 or fewer receptions. And 2, and this is unfair because it can happen to basically any player, but he spent the entire year last year managing a knee injury, right? Now, the Titans have done a great job of managing him. It hasn't really slowed him down when he's actually gotten on the field. But, those are the couple of things that I'm keeping an eye on. Otherwise, I just love him. We talk about explosive players. You put the ball in A.J. Brown's hands, and he might be as explosive as almost any other wide receiver in the NFL. Like, he's the player that takes the routine slant route 75 yards. He's the guy that catches the ball on the 8-yard line with the defender draped over him and bullies his way into the end zone. He's a bowling ball out there, despite the fact that he's a wide receiver. I love A.J. Brown. If you don't love A.J. Brown, find a different podcast.
You're doing it wrong.
Yeah, go find a different podcast. Yeah, I love him, though. Like,
I had A.J. Brown, after that trade, I had A.J. Brown at wide receiver 4.
Okay.
Right behind Adams, Hill, and Stephon Diggs.
Yep.
And then with the addition of Julio, I moved him down, like you said, to wide receiver 7. I don't see any way that the Titans can see what they have in A.J. Brown and not find a way to put the ball in his hands. I think Julio Jones coming over is going to be the complementary piece to A.J. Brown. That's not a crazy thing. We all think that.
Yep.
And so if I'm looking at which wide receiver am I going to make sure I get the ball to, for me it's A.J. Brown, and Julio is the complementary piece to that.
I agree. And this is probably the first time in Julio's career that it's like you go into the season as the nominal number 2.
Yeah.
Right. Calvin Ridley ended up being their wide receiver 1 last year for fantasy purposes, but Julio is Atlanta royalty. Like, I don't think he was ever viewed around that team as anything other than the guy in the passing game. But just to round out that thought on increased volume, as I mentioned, 7 games with 4 or fewer receptions. Kyle also notes that last year, on a per-game basis, he was 21st in terms of targets per game, 7.6. And this is interesting to me. 27.9 routes per game, which is 51st amongst wide receivers. So again, when you're at the very top of these wide receiver draft lists and you're trying to decide between wide receiver 5 and wide receiver 7, then yeah, you might lean towards a guy who's on the field more frequently, whether it's Stephon Diggs, who's running a route, or whoever it is wide receiver 5 for you. Calvin Ridley, who you expect to be on the field for every single play. Not a some sort of diss towards A.J. Brown, just more. We're looking for mini tiebreakers. We've used that phrase a lot throughout the pre-draft process, throughout the preseason. We'll continue to use it a lot as we go through some of the best the game has to offer.
He needs to average double-digit targets, though.
He does. Yes. He's,
like, end of story. That's what A.J. Brown just needs.
The Titans need him to push 175 this year.
Yep.
It would be great for everybody involved. Julio Jones, as we know, is wearing number 8 now in Tennessee. That's very exciting. Fun to see Julio Jones, who last year on a points-per-game basis was wide receiver 14. He was wide receiver 52 in terms of total points because he played just 9 games, 51 catches, 771 yards, and 3 touchdowns, Daniel. You've got him at wide receiver 17. I've got him at wide receiver 15. How nervous are you about Julio Jones, or how excited are you about Julio Jones this year?
I'm so excited that I get to be on the couch for the Julio Jones podcast.
Yay!
Just
He's your guy.
This is a part of the focus thing. Listen, Julio's a beast. He's been a superstar his entire career. That's never been in question. It's him being able to stay on the field, and it's his health, the way that they manage him. And I think coming to Tennessee, like we talked about how they managed A.J. Brown last year, I think he's coming to a good team that's going to be able to help manage him when he has some of those soft tissue injuries that he often works with. But he's a guy that it doesn't make a difference. If he's on the field, he's a playmaker. And so as long as he is there and he is playing, I do expect I don't know if you can expect someone to get banged up in the middle of a season, but I expect him to miss a couple games because it always feels like there's a couple games that he always just, especially with getting older. So I still have him as a top 20 guy, but he's not somebody that, like we just talked about with A.J. Brown, that is in that top tier, top 15, top 10.
So Julio Jones got traded this offseason in part because it sounded like he wanted to be somewhere where he could win big, right? Julio Jones, as we talked about, missed 7 games last year in total. I think Julio Jones is going to be motivated this season to prove to people that there's a lot of gas left in the tank.
Ooh.
Because it did not take long after Julio Jones' trade rumblings began, which they weren't even rumblings. The GM acknowledged it. I mean, the new GM, Terry Fontenot, acknowledged at the draft, like, yeah, we've taken calls on Julio Jones because our cap situation is very bleak right now. It did not take long for the naysayers to come out. I mean, Julio Jones had a very, very tepid market, right? And people were like, dude, why has no one traded for Julio freaking Jones yet? 3 years, $37.5 million still owed to this guy? That's pretty good. That's what Corey Davis got to sign with the Jets. Wouldn't you prefer Julio Jones for the next 3 years? There was not a huge market. And as we know, the Falcons were chided for the return.
Yeah.
Just a second-round pick for Julio Jones and a pick swap? Like, there's no way. I think all that's going to register with Julio Jones. I'm not saying that he wasn't playing with absolute ferocity with Atlanta over the past couple of years, but it's just different when the stakes are raised. Now you've been doubted. Now you got a chance to win big. It wouldn't surprise me if we have a bounce-back season for Julio Jones and that wide receiver 15, which we know is easily within range if he just plays, turns out to be like wide receiver 8 or 9.
Easy.
Yeah, he's super talented. Like,
if he just plays. That's the only, literally
but I
the
think his
only
motivation is going to be so sky high that nothing's going to slow him down. If he's got it in him to go, he'll give it a go,
be there.
right? Like, we got to think about the future. We have to think about draft stuff. Like, we need to be focused in on the chance to win because the Titans, especially offensively, feel like they're a Super Bowl challenging team. So I am more optimistic this year about Julio than I was even as recently as last year.
So this is, I think, just fundamentally, and we can disagree here, and that's okay because we love each other and we can do that.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, sometimes I think about the idea of this team is a team that is absolutely a Super Bowl contender, right? So if
but they think they are.
They think, yeah. So if you think that you're trying to do a playoff run, and you know that, hey, Julio's a little bit banged up, we'll have him sit out because we want him, in weeks 15, 16, 17. That's my concern when you have a guy and you have a team where it's like, we've got this and we know that we're going to go deep into the playoffs or we think we're going to go deep into the playoffs, and so you play it a little bit easy. But but that's totally projecting, and there's nothing about that. There's nothing scientific or anything.
Well, the other
like
side of that, which I always think about, is that unlike previous years, starting in 2020, we have only one bye per conference.
Mm-hmm.
So the amount of players that we saw, and I really should go back and get the reference point on this. Maybe Kyle and I can collab on this at some point. Like, how many teams actually actively rested players in weeks 15, 16, and 17? Like, I get 17 every year.
Sure.
Like, that'll happen. But how many teams, like, I don't think the Bills were, like, actively resting guys when things were close, but not necessarily within reach last year. I'd have to go back and check
that's
that.
fair.
But I feel like there are enough consequences with just one bye of basically every game until week 17, and this year week 18, that maybe teams will feel like there's more to play for. Again, but you're right. I mean, who knows? It could go one of two ways.
We're both right. How about we both can be right?
But but what I will say is that I think Tennessee's going to be playing for something. And like last year, we saw how conservative Carolina was with its star, Christian McCaffrey, because they knew they weren't playing for anything. And if Julio Jones is still in Atlanta and they were 6-8 going into week 15 and had 3 games left, they might be like, you know what, Julio? You got a low ankle sprain? Pack it up.
Yeah.
Now, he may disagree with them, but they need to look out for their best interests, where now I think Tennessee could easily be
Hey, man, we
10-4, and we have a chance to really do something special here, and we're going to give it a go. Obviously, teams are always going to be medically sound and safe, but like there's a different threshold that players feel when they're playing for something versus when they are not playing for something.
Totally.
But I'm in on Julio this year. Looking forward to seeing him. Hopefully the touchdown thing changes. It's been many years of us hoping for more touchdown-wise for Julio Jones, but for whatever reason has not been in recent years always as reliable in the touchdown department. Let's bring it home here with the tight end, Anthony Fercher, who takes over the Jonnu Smith role, sort of.
Yep.
He's a pretty good player, Daniel. He's actually like a pretty good athlete. He went to Harvard. We all know that. Whenever he catches a touchdown pass, he's always talked about how he went to Harvard.
Uh-huh.
He's a good athlete.
Yep.
Good player. Sleeper-ish type tight end. I've got him at like tight end 22 or 23.
He's a good football player, and he's a great tight end for this team.
Yeah.
And he's just not a fantasy guy for me.
Yeah, my thought is that like if Jonnu Smith, who amazing athlete, can never have more than 448 receiving yards in a season, I'm going to temper expectations just because for all those amazing numbers we passed along with Ryan Tannehill, 33 passing touchdowns and 40 total touchdowns. Tannehill didn't even throw for 4,000 yards last year, which I'm not, again, he's amazing, but it's reflective of the offense, right? I mean, how many starting quarterbacks are throwing for over 4,000 yards nowadays? The answer is like half the league at minimum.
There was this note under A.J. Brown. Tennessee ranked 30th in pass attempts last season.
So much better way of putting it, a much more succinct way of describing how Fercher's a nice player. He could be a reasonable bye week fill-in.
But those targets are going to A.J. Brown and Julio Jones.
And if they aren't, then Todd Downing, the new offensive coordinator, is going to be answering questions every single week about, like, why are we not throwing it to the two wide receivers who combined leave defensive coordinators without sleep throughout the week. Fun team ahead. Looking forward to it. Kyle, I think we might have some questions before we say goodbye here.
Oh, can I ask? Do you?
Sure.
How much time we have?
We have 5 minutes.
All right.
Yeah.
I want to ask a real quick question. These two teams have a week 14 bye and a week 13 bye, and based on the new schedule, when you look at it, hopefully I would set it up for me based if you have how you want to do your playoffs. Weeks 15 and 16, 14 and 15 are playoffs, and weeks 16 and 17 are playoffs.
Right.
So that way you're not playing week 18, which is when everyone sits.
Yeah.
So a week 14 bye is either the last week of the regular season or the first week of the playoffs.
Jeez, that's tough, huh?
So that's
NFL's not thinking about us fantasy people.
They are.
Huh?
They do not think about us. So I'm just saying, it's another thing that, not really to take away anything major, but when you're looking at tiebreakers or you're looking at players, and I see a bye that late, I'm not thinking I'm going to struggle, but I am thinking I'm going to make the playoffs. And if I'm going to make the playoffs, I want all the players that I have to be able to be available during my playoff run.
Man, I wonder what depending on how late your league allows the trade deadline to go, I wonder if there are going to be some people who have Derrick Henry on their roster who need to basically win out, and Derrick Henry is on a bye during the final week of the regular season. Will he be like a popularly traded player just because of that reason? I had not thought about those late buys and what it meant for the playoff structure and the possibility of it impacting player movement in fantasy. That's an interesting thought there.
Yeah.
Man, 13 and 14 for buys? That's
late.
Season,
That's really late.
Jeez, 13 for the Titans.
13 for the Titans, 14 for Philadelphia. So for the Colts.
Wow.
Sorry, I was thinking
14.
Carson Wentz.
Yeah, I know. But I'm just, for the Colts, who have so many injuries already. Not
I know.
Week 14. By their first round pick, Kwity Paye, by the way, recently suffered a little bit of a foot issue. I think he's still wearing a boot. Hope he gets well soon. All right, Kyle, you got some time for some social questions?
Yeah, a pair of quick questions here. Brian wants you to sell him on Kamara or Henry. He's got the 3rd overall pick, and he's going back and forth in PPR between the two.
Yes.
Yeah, you want to start?
Yeah. Take either one
Can't
of
go
them.
wrong.
Yeah,
I was
just
gonna say,
draft one of them, and you're
yes,
good.
the answer is yes.
Don't time
no,
out.
Man, so here's the calculus is this. Do you trust that Derrick Henry's ground production is going to be enough to offset Kamara's passing game work? And the reason why I trust it for Derrick Henry is that last year, when Taysom Hill was a starting quarterback, which still is very much in play this year for New Orleans, Alvin Kamara had a much, much different outlook. So for me, and if you told me tomorrow that Jameis is the starter, it's a little bit more of a thoughtful conversation. But Derrick Henry has been as steady as they come. Mm-hmm. It sounds weird to say this. Kind of underrated over the past couple of years.
Yeah. You truly can't go wrong. I think you pick which team you like. You pick which player you want to root for. Fantasy is about rooting for players that you want to root for. You know what I mean? So do you have one that you like more? Because that's the guy you should take.
If I had to guess, and I don't have this answer off the top of my head, if I had to guess over the past 2 seasons that Derrick Henry has a higher floor per week than Alvin Kamara, if I had to guess.
I would agree with that. Now,
I could be way off there. It feels anecdotal in my head, but if I had to guess, I bet the number of games in which Derrick Henry scored at least, let's say 15 points, is probably greater than the number of games in Alvin Kamara. I'm sure Kyle would probably find that out, but I'm guessing that's the case.
It's fair.
I'll have that answer to you by the time you get to this question. Half-point PPR for George, Antonio Gibson or Jonathan Taylor. Who you got?
Half-point PPR. Well, the rankings will tell you that it's going to be Jonathan Taylor. Liked what I saw last night from Antonio Gibson. It's really close. I have him, I think, 8 and 11 in terms of my running backs. So I'll go to Jonathan Taylor only because I think his volume is going to be so substantial as a runner that it will supersede the value that Antonio Gibson adds as a receiver. And as you mentioned, it's only a half-point PPR. So that the passing game impact a little bit different here. But I'll go Jonathan Taylor.
When you're talking about half-point PPR, I agree with you on Jonathan Taylor. And when you're talking about half-point PPR, I look at which one of those running backs gets into the end zone more often.
And I know Antonio Gibson scored a lot last year, but 11 touchdowns is not always easy to replicate. But again, good problem to have if you're choosing between those two backs.
Absolutely.
Like them a lot.
I love Jonathan Taylor.
Like them a lot. What do you got, Kyle?
I got you here. Derrick Henry, 20 games over the last 2 years with at least 15 PPR points.
Okay.
That ranks 4th among running backs. Kamar's 21.
Wow, I was wrong then. Okay, how about that?
Wow.
So this is why we have research here.
How many- You
Take
think
Alvin Kamara.
Fewer moving pieces. Go Derrick Henry.
Fewer
Okay.
moving pieces.
Yeah, interesting thought. Yeah. Okay, so the point is that like Daniel's Daniel's answer was the correct one. The answer is yes. Just
Yes,
take one
just
of
take
them.
one of them.
So that's gonna do it for today. What do you got?
I just want to say thank you. I don't get to sit on the couch very often.
It's so great.
I love being able to do this with you guys. It's been so much fun, and I just love you. I just want you to know that I love you. I love people.
I love you too, buddy.
And I want our show to know how much that like we all get along so well. And it's so great to have people that you love to be able to work with. I feel super blessed to be here.
Every day we thank ourselves. We thank you for being a part of our team. Daniel is the heart and soul of this operation. He did a wonderful job today, which was absolutely zero surprise to anybody, including
Oh,
me.
shucks.
That's going to do it for today. Mama Dopp is proud. Thanks for watching Fantasy Focus Football presented by Hotwire.